Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Moles. I'm going to tell you a story today about a young woman named Kitty. Later on, she gets known as Catherine or friend Catherine or even sister. And it's a story of an unlikely friendship between kindred spirits. You can see this drawing over here. She was born around 1780 in Dublin, Ireland. She was poor, from a poor Catholic family. A lot of Catholics at the time were poor, and there was great division between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland at the time, which obviously continued for many years afterwards. As it happened, when she was in her early teens, both of her parents died, and she was essentially orphaned. She was homeless for a while, and she and her brother and her sister were all split up and sent to live with different relatives. Many of the relatives that she lived with were Protestant, and she was devout Catholic, and this caused tension between them. Now, she could have joined a monastery, or excuse me, a nunnery, a cloister, but she said that she found their habits and norms, quote, particularly distasteful, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So what happened is she went to live with some quite distant relatives named the Callahans. And now the Callahans were a very wealthy Quaker couple who'd spent quite a bit of time in India doing some trading, and they moved back to around Dublin. What was interesting about this is the Quakers, Callahans, did not try to convert her. She remained a devout Catholic, and they obviously were devout Quakers. They didn't try to convert her, and they ended up living together. She ended up living with them for over 20 years. They took her in essentially as an orphan, as a kind of a maid, and they lived together for 20, 25 years, till she was about 50 years old in this house. This is a sketch of the house that they lived in. What united them, what they shared in common that really changed history and has a bearing on us now is they were all committed to serving the poor, especially poor women and children. And so, in the course of this relationship, the Quaker Callahans and the community that they lived in had quite an impact on Kitty, or Catherine as she became known later on. And in particular, the role of women in Quakerism, because at this point in time, many women, Quaker women, were traveling ministers. This is a sketch, I always forget the woman's name, a famous Quaker woman visiting with the Sultan of Turkey. Back in around the same time. And this was made such a profound impact on Kitty, and then later on Catherine, that one time when she traveled to London with a friend of hers who was a Catholic nun, she asked to be referred to as friend Catherine when she was introducing herself in London. Well, as it happened, when the Callahans died, I don't know if I mentioned they had no kids of their own, when the Callahans died, they left their entire fortune to her. All of their money and their house. And what did she do? In keeping with their shared passion for helping the poor, she went and bought a house on Baggot Street in Dublin, Ireland, which became the first House of Mercy. And this was the beginning of the Sisters of Mercy, which is one of the largest orders, Catholic orders in the world, and does work for millions and millions of people. Now, she was shunned when she did this. People thought she was crazy. You took this huge inheritance, you bought this big, nice house, and then you opened the doors to poor women and children. What are you doing? She was shunned by her neighbors, by some of her friends. Even the Catholic Church was dead set against her initially. But 7 years later, at the church's urging, she became a nun and started that order just so that she could carry on that work. And now there are Sisters of Mercy all over the world, helping millions and millions of people. And another interesting way that the Callahans may have had an impact on her is that it's no doubt that many times in the Callahans' homes, Quaker women would gather for their separate meetings for business that they had at the time. And it is said that when Catherine, now Sister Catherine, started her own order, that when there was a decision that needed to be made, she would gather all of the sisters together in a circle, and she would want to hear from each of them what they thought about the issue, and discuss together what should happen and what decision that they should make. Not exactly akin to Quaker consensus, but probably not far off it either. Certainly in stark contrast to the idea of a mother superior, which was essentially how nuns orders operated prior to this time. So this was a radical departure for Catholicism. So what was initially called Kitty's Kitty's Folly turned out to be Kitty's legacy, and now Sisters of Mercy run Mercy Hospitals, which is the fifth largest hospital organization in the United States and one of the top 100 employers that employs people, and helps millions and millions of people, for instance, in Africa who are struggling with AIDS. So there's a story of an unlikely friendship between some kindred spirits and what happens when you don't try to change the other person. Thanks.